Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Inessa and I am an author from Toronto, Canada, and I publish under the pen name A.N. Sage. I write a lot of mystery, a lot of fantasy, some young adult here, and there's also a thriller I'm working on and a picture book that I'm currently in the middle of. So I write in a wide variety of genres, including nonfiction. And on this channel, what I do is I talk a lot about the art of writing. I give tips and tricks for writing and kind of options for people on different tech to use, different writing tools. And I talk a lot about plotting and planning because I am a plotter and planner at heart. You will see a lot of planner videos and a lot of plotting videos. I like to be organized. So I posted a video fairly recently about Dabble, which is a program that you see on the screen right now. And I will link that video below if you want to take a look at how I use Dabble and what I use it for. But I got a lot of questions about the beats that I have set up for my cozy mystery. And I figured I would do a video where I go through them. We are all a little bit sick in the house right now, so it's the perfect time to do a video where you don't see my face because I look like death is coming for me, but it's not a good look. So I figured we'll do a screen share today and I can talk you through some of these beats to answer the questions that people had. So to start off, I do not have a typical kind of beat structure. I have a beat structure that I've kind of pasted and copied from different things. The majority of it was taken from when I used Plotter, and Plotter has a lot of different beats that you can use, and one of them is a cozy mystery beat. And so when I switched over to Dabble, I really wanted to keep using the beats that I used and kind of the outline that I used to structure my cozy mysteries because I really enjoyed how it was set up. But it was a combination of the beats from Plotter, notes that I've made for myself, different character interviews and things like that. Murder interviews, clues and settings and things that I've kind of added from my own experience of writing books and figuring out what works for me. And so I thought that we could go through these beats one by one so you can see, because there are 20 of them. Sometimes they form into 21. I know when I did the video, there was 21 because I was showing a specific book that I've added a beat to. But usually I start off with these 20 beats and I have it open. So this is my cozy mystery template in in Dabble. I pulled it up. This is the manuscript section, so we can just get rid of this because we're going straight into the plot. So this is what the plot looks like, and these are the 20 beats that I use to start from. I don't start with these plot lines, the additional ones. I organize those as I go, and I will kind of talk about how when we go through it. So let's open this up. So first things first, I'm gonna probably zoom in so you can see it better on the screen. And then let's make it this way because we don't need to see this kind of stuff here. But first thing first is the first beat. So the first beat of the book is we kind of meet the protagonist. Right now it's labeled as chapter 1, but that's just because that's the way the Dabble organizes it. Disregard the chapters because they kind of move around, but pay attention to the beats only when I'm going through this. So the first beat is meet the protagonist. It's your act 1 and it's the setup of your ordinary world. And that's what I have here for me. This is basically kind of the beginning of your story. You're showing your protagonist in their regular life. The one thing that I do like to mention in this beat or kind of hint towards is the internal goal of the protagonist, what their external goal is, and what the opposition for that is. So this way I have an idea of what the character is all about, and we can get right into the story. B2 is establishing the setting. So we're still in Act 1, and you can see here I've labeled this all, and I've got these colored ribbons for every act as well. So B2 is establishing the setting. So again, we're still back in the ordinary world, but here we're talking about like what the setting of the book is and how is that setting cozy, because we're talking about cozy mystery. So you want to show the town, the people, everybody knows each other. Maybe there is a business that your protagonist runs and then all the businesses around her, maybe how she talks to customers or clients or things like that. So this is where it becomes like that cozy setting. Beat 3, still in Act 1. Beat 3 is the ordinary world and story setup. So still an ordinary world, but in here in the beat, we want to talk about what the protagonist's story setup is. What situation is the story born out of? And so for something like this, you want to almost start dropping hints in a way to what is to come. We want to, if there's something that's going to come into play, a clue or something that's going to come to play later in your story, then you want to use this as an option to drop some of those clues. For my book, for example, A Grave Roast, the ordinary world and the story setup for me here was showing Piper, who's the protagonist, was showing more of her interaction with Stella Rutherford, who's her ghost familiar, and her interaction with Harry Houdini, with some of the people that come into her cafe. So these three beats kind of go hand in hand, where you're introducing the character, the world, the cozy setting, and kind of hinting at what is to come. Then beat 4 is the change or the disturbance. So we are still in Act 1. The first 5 beats are all in Act 1. So beat 4 is the change or the disturbance. We are still in the ordinary world here, but there is something that changes, something that tells the reader that things are not right here, and it hints at the murder that is to come. Maybe your protagonist overhears something that they shouldn't have. Maybe somebody's acting strange. Maybe there's a new person in town that is acting a little bit shifty, or maybe there's an argument that occurs between a few people. Maybe your protagonist breaks up a fight. Things like that. So these are all things that are going to be hinting towards something that is not quite right in this very cozy setting and this cozy world. Then we go into beat 5, and this is going to be basically the end of Act 1, the end of the ordinary world. This is turning point 1, and we are talking about what the turning point is in this act. How does the turning point change everything for the protagonist, and how does it launch, I say her because I usually write female protagonists, and how does it launch her or him on a new path? Usually this turning point in a cozy mystery is, you guessed it, the first murder. So I tend to have more than one murder in my books, or a murder and another crime, but the turning point number 1 is more often than not the first murder. So who gets murdered? What is happening here? How does your protagonist find them? And so over here, you basically, like, I have almost like an interview or questionnaire. So who the victim is, what the murder method is, or what the weapon is, what the time of death is, because I want to know, like, when it happens, where the body was discovered, who discovered the body, and the description of the victim. Again, clues can be put here. Then we go into beat 6, and now we're going into Purple Ribbon, Act 2. This is the reactive phase, so Act 2, reactive. The protagonist may be a reluctant sleuth and have to be convinced to get more involved. And these points, by the way, that I have here, these are all, when they're bullet points like that, they are all from Plotter. They have really good bullet points to kind of help you figure out what the beat is about. So the protagonist may be a reluctant sleuth and have to be convinced to get more involved. The protagonist may think of themselves as simply helping out or providing information to the police in the early stages of the investigation. Why are they only partially invested in the investigation, and how are their actions reactive instead of proactive? So in this beat here, essentially in a cozy setting, more often than not, you would have the protagonist fighting against wanting to investigate. So something needs to give them a reason to investigate. But in this sense here, they are not being proactive. They're not going out there and becoming a sleuth, Everything that they're doing to investigate is almost a reaction. It could be, I'm just giving the police some help, or I am just gonna get this extra information because it will help me not look like I'm responsible for this murder, right? Because there's a very nice trope in cozy mystery where you could have your protagonist be blamed for the murder, and the reason that they're starting to investigate is obviously to save their own behind. So things like that. So your protagonist is not going out there and being like, I'm going to solve this murder and I need to find out what happens. What they're actually doing is they're trying to stay out of it, but somehow will still get muddled into it. And again, as I said, I would highly recommend Plotter. It's a very inexpensive program, and if you get it just for the beats alone and the different templates that they have, it's totally worth it because they have so many resources for plotting. That's the name. So definitely recommend that. Now, chapter or beat 7. So now we get into the reason to investigate, or why the death wasn't random. So we're still in a reactive phase of Act 2, but we have reasons now. So what is the protagonist's reason for investigating? Did they find something else that relates to the murder? Did someone tell them something they shouldn't have? Did they overhear something else? What draws them into the investigation? And how is it established that the crime wasn't random violence or an accident? So in this beat, you kind of want to show that, hey, this actually was a murder, it was an accidental, and now we have a reason to investigate as well. Usually in this beat, I drop my first clue. So I added that note to myself that clue 1 should be here. So I add my first clue, and that's usually the reason for my protagonist investigating. That's just how I work mine out. Then we get to beat 8. So beat 8, still in Act 2. And in this beat, for some reason, we have a lot of extra lines. Oh, it's because I leave lines for myself to write notes. Never mind. So the suspect pool here narrows to the closed community, the cozy community that we have. As your protagonist starts to investigate, it becomes clear that the suspect pool is limited to a very small group of people. But how is the suspect pool narrowed to the close community? Are any of these people friends or family members that are suspects? Is the protagonist themselves a suspect? So again, this could be the police. This beat, you could talk about the police investigating your protagonist. It doesn't have to be your protagonist investigating other people. A lot of times, having the police investigate your suspect is a good way to push forward an investigation. So around this beat is where I start to insert my interviews, and the way that I work them is I have my suspect. So the first suspect, so it would be their name, where the interview takes place, what their alibi is, and I like to have my suspects tell one lie and one truth, and then point to somebody else, because that's them pointing or revealing something about another person or another clue is what keeps the investigation moving forward, right? Because now we have to go talk to somebody else. Then we move into beat 9, which is still in Act 2. And in beat 9 is where we start to form theories. So our sleuth now starts to plan things out and try to figure things out more. So what clues does the protagonist find in this act? What red herrings does the protagonist find in this act? And what theory do they develop? So a lot of times in this beat, I will have a second suspect that the protagonist will investigate. And again, it's the same setup. So name, interview, where the interview takes place, their alibi, and basically why they couldn't have done it, the lie, the truth, and who they point to. And a lot of times, whoever they point to in this particular case will become my red herring. So if you're not familiar with what a red herring is basically somebody that you're pointing the finger to, that the reader will think it will be responsible for the murder, but they are actually a scapegoat and they are not the murderer at all. More often than not, the red herring will then get murdered at some point. As often happens. So this is where you have your clues, your other clues, and your red herring will appear around this beat. Now our next beat, which is like kind of almost to the halfway point here. So beat 10 is our antagonist acts. So in this case, something happens where the murderer or the killer will act somehow and somehow influence our protagonist. So they can plant false clues to implicate other people, often the protagonist. They can move the body. They create a scenario that makes it look as if the death occurred at a different time than it actually happened. They can make an effort to get the case closed, put pressure on officials, or frame someone. A lot of times here, I will drop my second clue. The moving a body part is pretty fun. I have a book that is actually coming out now where I kind of used this. So I have a book coming out. We'll do like a little release party this week for Dabble in the French press. And I incorporated this type of situation into it, which was really fun. So this is your second clue that appears here, and a way to move the story from the antagonist's actions. Then we move into beat 11, and this is your trial and fail moment number 1. So your protagonist will have a very solid theory, or so they think, but the theory will not work. Why? What is the protagonist's reaction to their first failure? Some suspects are also cleared here as the protagonist works through the trial and fail cycles, and which suspects are those. So a lot of times there'll be more interviews that happen here. So your third suspect will happen here. The interview will then, your name, interview takes place, alibis, lie, truth, and who they point to. I like to work, when I work with this beat, I like to kind of use it as a stepping stone towards the rest of the story. So a lot of times I will also interject some more clues to the red herring here, because it will help the theory not have a leg to stand on. And then we move into beat 12, which is your trial and fail number 2. So again, another theory forms here, and then does it work? Why does it not work? Are any suspects cleared? And if the theory fails, what is the protagonist's reaction? So usually you will have another suspect here that you're working with. And then the way that I work this part is when they point to somebody, it will end in a dead end. So this is your first dead end that happens around this beat, where the protagonist is really almost reaching like a low point in a way, because they keep trying and failing. That's the trial and fail. Beat 13 is your turning point. So around this time, what is the turning point of this act? Does the primary suspect die? So for here, this is where the red herring, right? So you're going to have a primary suspect, your red herring usually, and that a lot of times is where the second murder will happen. Either that suspect will die, or there'll be another murder that will clear them and make it impossible for them to be the murderer of both. So who's the victim, murder weapon and method, time of death, where the body was discovered, who discovered the body, and the description of the victim. And this turning point here around beat 13 is what takes us into Act 3. So we have Act 3, and then we're going to go all the way to Act 4. So I work with a 4-act kind of system. So beat 13, even though we have 20 scenes, beat 13 is my midpoint, because there's a setup at the beginning, right? And some of these beats work together, so keep that in mind. So in beat 14, the stakes are rising. So now we're entering a proactive phase in Act 3. The protagonist is no longer working with whatever's handed to them. They're kind of being proactive. They're going out of their way to solve the murder and either clear themselves, or a lot of times their lives might be in danger, so they have a reason to go forward. So what is the protagonist's final theory? Why does this theory not work? Because we can't. If it worked, then that's the end of the book, and it's not the end of the book, it's just the middle. How does testing the theory lead to the biggest failure? So if you follow the Save the Cat, beat 14, the stakes rise, like afterwards, this will lead to the always lost moment. And then we have to say, like, what is the protagonist's reaction to the large failure? So more often than not, I will plant a clue here, and that clue will lead to this failure. So that's kind of how I like to work the stakes rise. And then we're moving on to the suspects cleared, so more proactive here. This is where the protagonist will start going back and doing second interviews. So we are going through some of the suspects that we had, and we're interviewing a lot of them again. You could introduce new suspects here, but I find re-interviewing suspects to find newer clues kind of keeps the interest more, and then you're not confusing the reader with so many suspects and names. So suspect 1, second interview, the same setup for the interview, but this time we are led to a second dead end. So we're going to go back, we're going to interview them, but it takes us nowhere. It takes your protagonist nowhere. And then turning point number 3, what's the turning point? What does the turning point reveal? Does the turning point, this is beat 16, does the turning point reveal the real murderer? So not the red herring this time. A lot of times I will go through this, and this will be suspect 3, so the third suspect that we had before, and this will be their second interview. And then Beat 17, which is the worst thing, and this is Act 4 now. So the worst thing, and now we're in the confrontation phase, which means that the protagonist is about to confront the antagonist. We're really like building up to the end of the story here. So the worst thing. So what's the worst thing or situation that could happen to the protagonist with this case? Is their own life in danger? Is somebody they love in danger? Is their community in danger? Things like that. How could this worst thing play into the protagonist's external and internal goals? So this is really important because right now this worst thing is, if we go back to the beginning, is basically the opposition. So how is this opposition finally coming into play in beat 17? So we have to think of it that way. Then we have the final clue. So the final clue is introduced in beat 18, and this is what reveals the killer and the murder method. So a lot of times in the confrontation, this is the physical confrontation that your protagonist will have with the antagonist. So how will the murder method be shown? And answer any questions the readers might have about it: who committed the murder, how the murder was committed, how the protagonist figured it out, what clues unlock the mystery, the final clue, and explain any red herrings if that's needed, unless they're dead. So the way I like to think about this beat is, the Bond villain that takes too much time to explain what their plot was all along. This is that beat. This is the villain basically explaining everything, or the protagonist figuring everything out. Beat 19, we're almost there, guys. Stay with me. So beat 19 is final confrontation. It's still in the confrontation, obviously, act. What form does the final confrontation take? How will the protagonist confront the antagonist? What unique skills or tools will the protagonist use to win the battle? And have those skills or tools been worked into the story? This is very, very important. This part here will make you go through the rest of everything you plotted and add in those Easter eggs. So if you are writing, say, a paranormal cozy mystery, is there magic that your protagonist has or has slowly been developing that could lead them to hope? Have you been hinting at that since the beginning? Have they been developing those skills? Has the protagonist, if there's no magic involved, have they somehow started taking on new physical skills? Is there something that could help them here? Have they recently learned how to shoot a bow and arrow? And that is how they end up taking down the protagonist. So things like that offer you a chance to really create a fully developed character, but also create a fully developed plot. And then it's moments like this that when the protagonist finally kind of wins the day and wins over the antagonist, but if you use something that you've kind of played into the story already, it's really satisfactory for the reader, because then they can say like, yeah, I didn't see that coming, but now I totally get it. So that's the final confrontation. And then the last beat is equilibrium restored, which is the justice part, right? So how will justice be done? How will equilibrium be restored to the community? How will the subplots be wrapped up? What glimpse of the protagonist's new world will be given to the reader? What new relationships have been created over the course of the story? What possibilities are in store for the protagonist now that the murderer has been caught? And if this is part of a series, this is a good place to give a hint about the next book. So this here is basically like your end cap to the whole story. So you have your protagonist, they won the day, and you're kind of like letting the reader know what happened afterwards. So it could be internal dialogue. It could be like another glimpse of the protagonist's day, which is now a direct opposite to where they started out, because they grew as like a hero and a person throughout this. Is there opportunity for them to kind of work with the police on future cases? Does something happen here that's leading into the next book of the series, if there is one? So this is where beat 20 comes in. And that is the whole book. Essentially, that's what they will look like. So you would have your 4 acts. Number 2 being the longest, and that's the 4-act plot structure that I use in my 20 beats. So I hope that answered questions for everybody who had them on the beats. Let me know if you have any other questions for plotting cozy mysteries, or any other cozy mystery questions. I am currently in the middle of a longer cozy mystery series, and it's my whole world right now, so I'm happy to answer any questions. And as always, thank you so much for being a part of this community that we have here and subscribing to the channel. Thank you guys. I really love making these videos for you, and anytime that you leave comments for me, it makes me so happy. So thank you for watching. Stay magical, and I will see you next week for another video. Bye.